Galatians chapter 4. I am concerned for you. You observe days, and months, and seasons and years. Galatians chapter 4 continues Paul's letter to the Galatians, focusing on the theme of freedom and the contrast between the bondage of the law and the freedom found in Christ. Paul uses the analogy of an heir and a slave to illustrate the believer's relationship with God. He emphasizes the significance of faith in Christ, the adoption as sons and daughters of God, and insists that they do not return to the works of the law. Exegesis by sections and verses. Verses 1 to 7. We are sons and heirs, through Christ. Paul compares the spiritual status of believers before and after faith in Christ. He compares them to children who were under tutors, who were guardians and managers, which was the law, until the time appointed by the Father. Through Christ, believers receive adoption as sons and daughters of God. That enables believers to cry out, Abba, Father. He has become the Father of all those who believe. Paul emphasizes the freedom and benefits of being heirs through Christ. Verses 8 to 11. Returning to the bondage of the law. Observing days, and months, and seasons, and years. Paul expresses his concern for the Galatians, who once were enslaved to weak and beggarly elements which were worthless. He questions their desire to return to such bondage, fearing that his labor among them may have been in vain. Verses 12 to 20. Paul's plea for them to be free from the bondage of the law. Paul urges the Galatian believers to become like him, free from the bondage of the law. He reminds them of their warm reception when he first visited them, expressing his bewilderment at their current acceptance of false teachers. Paul desires to be with them, and pleads with them to recognize the truth. He says, Have I therefore become your enemy, because I tell you the truth? In verse 20 he says, I would like to be present with you now and to change my tone, for I have doubts about you. Verses 21 to 31. An allegory of Hagar and Sarah. Paul compares Hagar and Sarah to illustrate the contrast between slavery and freedom. He contrasts Hagar as representing the bondage of the law, and Sarah as representing the freedom of the promise. Paul urges the Galatian believers to cast out the slave woman, who is Hagar, and her son Ishmael, symbolizing the rejection of the law. He encourages them to embrace the free woman, who is Sarah, symbolizing the promise of freedom through Christ. Overall summary. In Galatians chapter 4, Paul continues to contrast the bondage of the law and the freedom found in Christ. He illustrates this through the analogy of an heir and a slave. He highlights the adoption of believers as sons and daughters of God through faith in Christ. Paul expresses his concern for the Galatian believers, urging them to reject the bondage of the law and embrace the freedom that is found in Christ. He uses the allegory of Hagar and Sarah to emphasize the distinction between slavery and freedom. The chapter serves as a reminder of the believer's privileged status as children of God, and the need to stand firm in the freedom and grace of Christ, and to reject returning to the works of the law.